if we have the right technology, we can run these things with essentially without any fuel. The energy can be extracted from, you know, the quantum foam or the 0 point field, or whatever you want to call it. And you know, maybe we'll get into this, maybe we won't have time, but I think that was demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt on 9/11.
Hey friends, if you watched part 1 of my conversation with Andrew Johnson titled UFOs, Suppressed Technology, and the Breakaway Civilization, I want to thank you for doing so. This is part 2, and I split the call into 2 parts because Andrew took a bit of a right turn to talk about the 9/11 event and his belief that some sort of targeted energy was used to help bring down the towers, and he mentions the work of Judy Wood. As you'll see here, we don't see eye to eye on everything, but I do have an open mind, and one thing's for certain: we all know the official story about 9/11 is untrue. So with that said, I hope you enjoy this second part of my interview with Andrew Johnson from checktheevidence.com. Thanks for listening.
Because the way that the World Trade Center was destroyed, which has essentially been revealed by my friend Dr. Judy Wood, who I already mentioned, that actually uses a technology which you can see has, you know, a kind of, looking at the characteristics, you can link it to some of the technology that's been talked about in the UFO community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why I'm saying that, and then we go back to the gatekeepers. Some of the gatekeepers, and I include in that now Stanton Friedman, Richard Dolan, and a few others, they will not talk about what is on Dr. Judy Wood's book. Or if they do talk about it, they say that they don't understand it, or it might be wrong, but they don't say why. And that you know, you mentioned that I spoke at the Exopolitics conference in 2012, the 4th one. That is true. And the presentation that I did there goes into what I just said in quite some detail, and it's called the Taboo of Disclosure. So if you watch that presentation and look at some of the other videos that myself and Dr. Wood have done, you will see my take on why I think this connects into the UFO question.
Right.
And I'll give you another quick example. One thing that we can sort of go backwards and then forwards again.
Andrew, if I may, let me just jump in though. You mentioned Dr. Judy Wood, and one of the things that I want to just address for the audience is, in this truth community, in the community of researchers who are honestly trying to look at quantifiable evidence about a variety of different subjects, we don't all have to agree. And I just need to point out, in the interest of full disclosure, Judy Wood, for me, and no offense to you if you and she are friends, I've never interviewed her, but for me, I've found her late arrival on the scene in 9/11 Truth, and then sort of her bombastic approach to really, in some of the interviews I listened to early on, degrading, speaking not very kindly of previous researchers who came before her, like David Ray Griffin and Dr. Stephen Jones and his work into thermites and his discovery of thermitic material and in the dust at Ground Zero. She had a bombastic approach that did not resonate with me. I found it very off-putting.
Well, can I also jump in? Because
sure.
A lot of this is not really true, because...
Well, I listened to interviews in which she did disparage Stephen Jones specifically. I know what you're thinking
of, but I'd encourage other people to listen to those, because what I think people have to realise is that there are dishonest people who are coming forwards and saying things both about Dr. Judy Wood, and they're saying things about what she has said. And what she has said is that, well, what they say she has said is not actually what she's said. And I think the problem then comes is that when you say such and such is wrong, that is then taken to be an attack. And I've experienced this as well. And if you read my free book 9/11 Finding the Truth, you know that's essentially a catalogue of just the type of thing that you and I are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't really a latecomer on the scene either, because she was actually speaking out in 2006, and Dr. Wood and I came into contact through the Scholars for 9/11 Truth group, and that's what I write about. And yes, of course we can, make disparaging remarks about other researchers, but and people do this, and people will accuse me of doing this. But what we have to understand, for example, is that Stephen E. Jones came onto the 9/11 research scene in 2005. Right, that is a fact. He appeared on the scene talking about this idea that thermite was used to destroy the towers, and that happened in 2005. I think it was August or September 2005 to be exact.
Yeah, and just to be clear, just to be clear though, because we hadn't thought that we'd get into this this particular part in the conversation about 9/11, and I do want to circle back. I want to talk about Nikola Tesla. I want to talk about free energy. I want to wrap this thing up and talk about a couple of other things to round out our conversation about UFOs. But I find Stephen Jones to be a very, very upstanding guy. I've met him. I've met so many of the people in that movement, and he lost his job at BYU for doing that research.
No, he didn't lose it. He retired. He retired on full pay. He said that he was fired, but he wasn't.
He was forced out.
But he retired on full pay.
No, he was forced out. But my point would be, why would there need to be infighting in the truth? Because here's the thing.
It's not about infighting. Let me just get a few facts straight.
No, you can. I just want to say one thing, though. You and I can agree to disagree on a variety of these subjects, but you and I both know that what happened on 9/11, the official story, is poppycock. So that's the important part. I think when people get bogged down into there were no planes, there's some really fringe ideas out there like no planes and some of these others that I will not touch.
You're getting ahead of things, really, because we have to establish a few ground facts, really, and I tried to do that, and then we could go into some of those other issues. And I wanted to just mention a couple of things because it is relevant to where I was going, about 5 minutes or so ago in the conversation. And although it might seem I'm diverging off into Stephen Jones and all this, it is directly relevant, and I need people to understand this because it is of fundamental importance. I do agree with you, of course, that we all talk about 9/11 and the official story being false, but I have to also try and convey to people that there is another false story that has been perpetrated and people have been sort of persuaded into, and the people that are giving out this false story, they're all very nice and pleasant on the surface, but we can prove absolutely and categorically that what they have said is untrue, and they know it is untrue, right? And I want to just mention, before I go into any of that, and we may not have time to go into that now, but Stephen E. Jones, as I said, came onto the 9/11 scene for whatever reason in 2005, and I think I know the reason. And the reason is because the NIST reports, which were the technical reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center, were published at the same time when Stephen E. Jones came onto the scene. Now, that might be because he'd looked at the NIST reports, but I think there was more to it than that. What some people may know, but I don't think they may fully appreciate the significance of this, is that Stephen E. Jones was involved in cold fusion research.
I knew that.
In the late 1980s. Right, so you know that, and maybe a few of the other listeners do. So that is a fact, right? That is a fact. He was involved in cold fusion research, right? Now, he actually came up with the name cold fusion. He and a colleague, Paul Palmer, and he said this in an interview, he said it himself. I've got recordings of him saying it. You can go and listen to those recordings if you wish. Now, people might not have heard of cold fusion. Obviously, you have. What is cold fusion as a thing? How would you characterize it?
How would I characterize it? Well, I think his research was leading him to conclude that free energy exists, and everybody had said cold fusion was impossible. And his research suggested otherwise. I don't know if that's true or not.
Right. Essentially, I agree with you. But what cold fusion was an energy phenomenon. Okay, it was an energy phenomenon, and one of there are basically two key issues with cold fusion. One was the anomalous radiation, or neutron radiation as it was, that was discovered in some of the experiments. That's what caused the scientists a real problem to explain, because there shouldn't have been any neutrons with the sorts of experiments they were doing. The other problem was tritium, right? Now, tritium is a form of hydrogen which has 2 neutrons and 1 proton. Right, and that was discovered in these experiments, and it was discovered not just by Pons and Fleischmann, the original researchers, but by a number of other researchers such as John Bockris And there's a video of him talking about this, which people can watch if they want. So, and that again was also a problem for the scientists, because this tritium should not have been there. It's only produced in nuclear reactions, right? It shouldn't have been happening in these experiments as they were being done. Switch to 9/11, and you will find studies that show that the World Trade Center had water levels, water there in which there was an elevated level of tritium at 50 times the normal level.
Right.
This is inexplicable, right, by any conventional means. Okay. Now, this, I think, is the reason why Stephen E. Jones was involved in 9/11 research, because whoever asked him to get involved knows that 9/11 involves some type of energy, and I think we have now a better handle on what that type of energy is. And it is a form of free energy, right? And it is related to something called the Hutchison Effect, right? Now, the Hutchison Effect, I've written a bit about this, and you'll find a lot of other information about this. And again, it's the Hutchison Effect itself is like the UFO issue. You know, you have people saying, "Oh, yeah, it's definitely real," and others saying, "No, it's just a hoax." Right. You know, so it's the same sort of thing. But the Hutchison Effect is essentially an energy phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's essentially an energy phenomenon, and I won't. You know, we can go back to the UFO stuff, but just to give you a little sort of flavour of it here. I joined the 9/11 research community, I suppose you'd say, essentially in 2004. And Dr. Judy Wood came into contact, and we came into contact at the end of 2006, early 2007, and that was through the Scholars for 9/11 Truth group. Guess who invited me to join that group? You guessed it, Stephen E. Jones and Jim Fetzer. They actually invited me to join that group, so I can claim a kind of level of inside knowledge. And that's
well, I would say Fetzer. Was it Fetzer specifically, or was it both of them? Because I know Jones and Fetzer had a falling out. And
I know I've written all about that. Mm-hmm. I've written, but I didn't want to dwell on that too much, because fast forward to 2008, and this was after Jim Fetzer had invited me onto the steering committee of the 9/11 Scholars group, Scholars for 9/11 Truth group, or 9/11 Scholars as it then became called, after this breakup with Mr. Jones and so on. And we were on, myself, Dr. Judy Wood, we were, you know, kind of assuming that Jim Fetzer wanted to tell the truth about 9/11, but it became very clear to us in early 2008 that he was very, very uncomfortable when we started talking about the Hutchison Effect. And I've written in quite a lot of detail about this, and it's all on my website. It's in my free ebook, which people can download. So it became very clear to me that what made Fetzer uncomfortable was the energy effects which were seen in Dr. Judy Wood's research, in the evidence she gathered, and specifically of talking about the Hutchison Effect. And it has been seen in John Hutchison's experiments that you get these anomalous energy effects, and for example, it seems to involve something to do with nuclear effects, because when he's done his experiments, the Geiger counter readings change. In other words, the background radiation count drops when John Hutchison does his experiments, and there's again no easy explanation for that. So, and going back to John himself, he was visited in 1983 by well-known UFO debunker Colonel John Alexander. He was visited in 1983. Colonel John Alexander makes no secret of this. He's spoken about it on Coast to Coast. Alexander was with John Hutchison for a period of 4 months, and he, at the time, was working for, Los Alamos National Laboratories. And that's, of course, where they developed the A-bomb in the 1940s. And coincidentally, Stephen E. Jones has also done work for Los Alamos National Laboratories. Now, I've got him saying this in an interview.
Well, let me just jump in, because we've covered a lot here in a very short time, and gone in a direction I didn't expect to go. I just want to circle back. Now, you mentioned Fetzer and Jones. You alluded, I think, to Fetzer having a bit of a falling out with Judy Wood over this Hutchinson effect. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't Fetzer sort of embraced this? How did the towers collapse? I think hasn't
No.
Fetzer sort of acknowledged
No.
Judy Wood's work and referred to it? And
Not really.
Okay, because
Not really.
but here's the thing, and I think it may be the same problem I have with Dr. Judy Wood. Again, she's a friend of yours. We're all in this thing together trying to find truth. So I think we should move off this topic and back to the other. But if Stephen E. Jones had a falling out from Fetzer, and then Fetzer had a falling out with Judy Wood, and I'm not the world's biggest Judy Wood fan. It doesn't mean that she doesn't have merit. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about her work. It just I was explaining to you my problem with Judy Wood is I found her to be bombastic because if it wasn't for the work of Dr. Stephen Jones, I would have not woken up as quickly as I did. I was absolutely enthralled with his investigation into nanothermites and his genuine excitement with what he was finding and the fact that the Mockingbird mainstream media would not cover it and would not touch it and would not talk about the nanospheres.
That's not entirely true because Stephen E. Jones has been on the BBC. He was on
sure, but David E. Griffin has published numerous books, but he can't get a New York Times review. But I just want to say one thing. I want to say one thing. But let me finish. You brought up tritium in the dust, and there's all of this conversation about. Pardon me?
In the water.
In the water. Okay. Well, is it not possible that micronukes were used to bring those buildings down? And if it wasn't micronukes, I do not want to disregard any of the research done into nanothermites. And for anybody who wants to read a great paper about it, read The Top 10 Connections Between NIST and Nanothermites by Kevin Ryan. It's a fascinating read, and you'll understand, folks, how NIST stacked the deck in their report. And, of course, everybody on NIST is an expert in nanothermites and related to that industry, and nobody would talk about those towers being brought down by a detonation or by an implosion or by nanothermites.
I'd like to respond to just a couple of things. We can go back to the other conversation because it is connected, and I haven't yet managed to lay that connection out for you.
Well, that's because you went down the Hutchison Effect path.
Yeah. Well, I needed to mention that because it's an energy phenomenon, and I wanted to give you an understanding of the movement. Because you said, for example, you became very interested in nanothermite and the thermite research. So did I. Mm-hmm. I became very interested in that, and I was actually at the time very relieved that we seemed to have an academic speaking out, in that way, in the way that Stephen E. Jones did, and that's what attracted me. And I got involved in the scholars group because of that. For the similar reasons to what you just said yourself. Mm-hmm. And I actually ended up, for example, printing out, I think, 100 copies of that paper that he'd written. And I printed it and I stapled it into a booklet. I did it myself. And I gave this out. There was some meeting in London. I didn't give it out myself. I wasn't able to go to London. I gave it to somebody else to give out. So so I was in that place too. But the thing that I tried to get across with this idea of energy, and again, if you study the thing with nukes and these connections with nanothermite and so on, it just does not explain the evidence, and that's what you have to go back to. If you want to know the truth about UFOs or the UFO question, or Gordon Cooper's case or the Tether incident, you have to look at the available evidence, right? And the same is true here. The same is true as what we've just been talking about. And if you keep looking at the evidence and don't concentrate too much on, these disagreements and so forth and these nasty name callings and all these things that have gone on, then you're more likely to get closer to the truth. And that's what I've tried to stay focused on. And I wanted to point out that, for example, Dr. Judy Wood, what she did with the evidence is she put that into request for correction to NIST. And then she took that to court eventually. And that wasn't done by Stephen E. Jones and the people that were associated with him. They did do a request for correction, but then they didn't put that into a fraud case. And I don't want to go into all that detail, but what I did want to mention is that one of the defendants in the court case, this is a point I was trying to get to before, was a company. Because one of the companies that was involved in writing the NIST technical reports was a company called Science Applications International Corporation. Okay, and the reason why I wanted to mention them specifically was twofold. The first reason is that they were in charge of ground zero security at the World Trade Center the day after 9/11. as I say, they're called Science Applications International Corporation, SIIC. They helped NIST with some of the composition of the reports. So they were prosecuted, or sorry, they were attempted to be prosecuted for science fraud, because they should have known that the way those towers came down, or they didn't come down, they actually turned to dust in midair. They should have known that. They should have seen that, and they should have not allowed a fraudulent report to be produced. And under the Data Quality Act, you can essentially sue them for fraud, for taking money and producing a fraudulent report. That's what Dr. Judy Wood and Jerry Liebhardt did, and Dr. Morgan Reynolds as well. And it's what Dr. Stephen E. Jones and Kevin Ryan didn't do. They did publish things on the internet and so forth, as you've already said, and I'm aware of those things, but they didn't put it into the court system like Dr. Judy Wood did. And that's very, very important if people should choose to investigate it. The second reason why I wanted to mention Science Applications International Corporation is because and I think 2 or 3 of the disclosure witnesses, and when I say disclosure, I mean the UFO ET disclosure, they mentioned this company as being benefactors of the black budget, the so-called black budget. And I should explain the context of that, because we haven't yet mentioned a UFO figure called Dr. Stephen Greer, I don't think. So that was why I wanted to mention that, because Dr. Stephen Greer, and this is how I became interested in this whole scene, he produced something called the Disclosure Project, which came to the fore in 2001, and he had this big press conference in May 2001 at the National Press Conference Club. He had I think 20 witnesses testifying. He got Gordon Cooper's testimony. That was in his document as well, the one that we mentioned earlier on, or something related to that. And Stephen Greer put together this thing he called the executive briefing, and it was about 200 pages long. And he had Gordon Cooper, he had Captain Robert Salas talking about the nuclear missiles which were shut down by the object, or apparently shut down after the appearance of an object. They were shut down, and the shutdown of these missiles in the Minuteman missile silo appeared to be related to the appearance of an object over the base. That happened in 1967. That was one of Greer's witnesses, and he had John Callahan, the head of the Federal Accident and Investigation Board for the FAA. He told this account of when they tracked a UFO on radar in 1986, the so-called Japan Airlines case, which John Callahan had official documents about. He was a witness too. So anyway, Greer produced that document, 200 odd pages long, or however long it was. And in that document, you can I think it's downloadable now. Science Applications International Corporation is mentioned 5 times. 5 times. So what is going on here? What is this company involved in? The witnesses say that they were, as I say, they were big benefactors of the black budget. Money went into this company, but they didn't really know. They couldn't see any obvious product, any obvious kind of service that this company was doing. So what was that company doing? And then they turn up in relation to 9/11, and they if you look at their website, they're one of the areas of research that they do is research into directed energy weapons. And they also do research into psychological operations. So to me, I think I would have thought somebody like Stephen Greer would be very interested in exploring that and talking about that. But according to what I've seen and read from Dr. Stephen Greer, he thinks that Al-Qaeda did 9/11, and he doesn't really talk about it. So those are really the connections I wanted to make, and people can verify those connections for themselves, by looking at the available evidence.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I do think that the 9/11 false flag is a litmus test for truth. Those who are willing to acknowledge that 9/11 didn't go down exactly how the government tells us it went down, those who will talk about that, are certainly those that we can rely on more for telling the truth than somebody who would continue to embrace the official story at this point, because either that's intellectual dishonesty or it's pure fraud.
Right.
To embrace the official story. Well, I'll tell you what, just to put a period on the 9/11 conversation, I think anybody actively doing research, trying to figure out what happened that day, is somebody who deserves a gold star. So whether it's any of these people we've talked about or any of the people listening, if you're willing to talk about what happened on 9/11 and try to wake others up to the fact that everything that's unrolled since, the Patriot Act and all of the wiretapping against American citizens and all of these wars, everything was done in the name of 9/11 and fighting terror in the name of your security. If you can try to wake up your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and the people you love about 9/11, then maybe they can wake up to these other things. But whether or not nanothermites were used to bring down the towers or not, I don't know. But what I do know is this. When NIST was asked, was the steel tested for explosives or thermite residues, NIST responded by saying, NIST did not test for the residue of these compounds in the steel, end quote. And the bottom line is the towers weren't brought down solely by airplanes crashing into them. How they were brought down, I don't think any of us knows for sure. Judy Wood may be on the right track, but I think your point, Andrew, is that there are systems of energy perhaps controlled by, or at least technologies of free energy that the breakaway civilization understands and maybe using to have UFO-like craft of their own. I think that that's definitely a possibility and a probability as they keep us mired down in this fossil fuel ridiculous more than 100-year-old paradigm. They're not going to allow us to move forward. They're not going to allow us to go to the moon. They're not going to allow us to go to the stars. They're not going to allow humanity to go from a type 0 civilization to a type 1 civilization, much less a type 2 or a type 3 civilization where we can really harness the power of the universe. They're not going to let us do it. We're the serfs. We're the slaves. They are the breakaway civilization. Is that a pretty decent way to round out this conversation?
Well, I think so, yes. I mean, I encourage people to investigate deeper. And I do agree that I think the theme in all of this is that it is a form of slavery, and the energy issue is a big slavery card, as is the health issue and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I think people fail to perhaps see that is right in the middle of 9/11. That's what I've been trying to express to people. And if you read the book that I've put together, I think that hopefully, if I've done it right, it should become at least a little bit clearer, what the heck I'm on about and why I'm saying, these things in the context that I'm saying them. And I agree with you. People that are investigating 9/11 or any of these things, truly with an open mind, and they've got their BS meters finely tuned, they should end up spiritually in a better place than when they started, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree. And your book is 9/11, Finding the Truth, and your website is checktheevidence.com. Again, guys, anyone listening, just know that all of our hearts are in the right place. If you're listening to this material and you've managed to stay with us for more than an hour, I'll probably have broken this into a two-part piece to post on YouTube because it was such a long conversation. But if you stuck with us, I want to thank you for doing that. And I just want to point out again that we're all in this mess together. The powers that be, the breakaway civilization, they've destroyed our money. They control the monetary system worldwide. They want to roll out a cashless society. They want to put you and your children in chains if they allow you to survive at all as they roll out their transhumanist agenda, as they lock down the water supplies worldwide, as they continue to keep us on this bogus petrodollar, this bogus fossil fuels paradigm, and will not allow us to travel to the stars. Our guest has been Andrew Johnson from checktheevidence.com. And Andrew, I really can't thank you enough for your time. You were very generous to spend almost 90 minutes with us.
Oh, you're very welcome, and I thank you for allowing me to put forward some of the information that I've been able to do.
Well, guys, do check out checktheevidence.com. It's a very interesting site, and Andrew's definitely an interesting chap, and he comes to us from the UK on this call. Andrew, can we talk again in the future?
Anytime, Sean. Yeah, just we'll set something up, and I'm happy to come and talk a bit more about anything that's on the site or other things.
Okay, terrific. And guys, none of this was intentionally bombastic between Andrew and I. Again, when we have conversations like these, we're not all going to agree on everything, but you know what? Sometimes these topics can be eye-openers, because maybe Andrew knows a little bit more about some of this stuff than I do as it relates to Judy Wood's work. And, maybe I'm wrong about Judy Wood. So with that said, let's part as friends. And again, Andrew, thanks again.
Thank you very much, Sean. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And guys, thank you for listening. Thanks for checking out our work at sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com, where we try to give you real news, truthful news 24/7, and we do appreciate you. Have a great week. Bye-bye.